Diving in Overwatch can be one of the most powerful strategies, and in this season, it might be the best thing to be doing in every single game. But how to dive, who to dive with, and how you could do it in the chaotic nature of ranked is pretty difficult. So in this video, we're going to break down everything you need to know about how to dominate with dive, including compositions, characters to choose, how to set up a dive, and most importantly, how to win more games. So we're going to break it all down, but do me a huge solid and check me out on stream right now live. And come ask me a question in the links down below, and let's jump into it. Now, the first thing that we need to talk about is the composition breakdown. What heroes can be played with the dive, and how do they vary? Because every single hero is different, so every single dive is going to be different with those heroes in them. Now, first off, let's talk about the cornerstone of every dive, which is the tank, and there's 4 dive tanks: Winston, D.Va, Wrecking Ball, and Doom, and each of these are going to be very, very different from one another. Winston is the more cornerstone dive tank, jumps in, puts his bubble down, which everyone that is around his bubble on his team benefits from, and it creates a ton of space. He gets to jump in on a dime, so he gets to surgically go at the target that he wants to select. And his Primal Rage can allow him to stay alive when the opponents all try to focus him in an all-in dive. We'll talk about that concept a little bit more later. Now, the other tanks play a lot differently. While D.Va can definitely dive in similar and has defense matrix to create space and block cooldowns, Bubble protects Winston and his team more, while D.Va has more potential burst damage, and there's other various differences between these tanks, but I would put them generally in the same category of dive tank. Now, Wrecking Ball is way different than these two, primarily because of how he has to set up, which is a term that we'll talk about a little bit later. And of course, Wrecking Ball is going to have his own strengths and weaknesses. While he might not help his team nearly as much as someone like Winston does with Winston Bubble, Wrecking Ball is also less demanding of resources because of his shields that he gives himself, because of his survivability, so he can be played with a different lineup of characters and is less greedy from his supports. Last up, let's talk about Doomfist, who's the most untraditional out of these dive characters, because he's a little bit more like a scalpel. And what I mean by that is he's very surgical in how he enters a fight and exits a fight. Doom is not a character that is necessarily going to be able to jump in directly, stay in the fight for a while his team is fighting. Doom is going to look to make giant amounts of impact very rapidly and potentially just leave the fight outright. And there could be specific extra setups with Doom centering around his power punch, trying to get that pre-engage with his team. Now, we do got to talk about DPS, and I'm going to split these into 2 categories. The go-in, which is DPS that go in with the dive tanks that are actually getting close range, technically brawling with their team, and trying to be the one that manually closes out the fight. And there's 4 of these characters: Tracer, Genji, Sombra, and Reaper. Each of these have different sets of mobility. Sombra's a little bit more disruptive, but typically wants to coordinate a hack around the initial dive so that the target doesn't have any cooldowns to counteract. I will sometimes instantly get deleted. Genji wants to just add to the damage and creates momentum as he gets kills and elims as the dive kind of plays out. Tracer typically just wants to chase down and follow up any of the weakened targets that are low cooldown, and Reaper basically just wants to like teleport in most of the time, and utilizing some of the space that is created by his tanks, he gets to teleport in, go and help burst down the enemy team. And that's these 4 go-in DPS, but then there's also the value-away DPS is what I'm going to call them, and these are DPS that can aid to a dive without being inside the dive, and it's like a Pocket of Far or Echo. A Widowmaker can actually do damage to help the dive or get a limbs using the space that the other DPS and tank is creating. And there's also characters like Soldier or Sojourn that can take off angles aggressively and follow up some of the space that is created by tanks. Think like a Wrecking Ball slam into a Sojourn rail or a Soldier helix or something like that. Next off, let's talk about the supports. And just like with the DPS, there's 2 categories: the go in with or the add value from away. The go in with is primarily Kiriko, Lucio, and technically Moira as well. Kiriko can teleport with your team to create value, Suzu your team in, deal damage herself, follow up, and try to close out a target. Lucio can go in as well, speeding his team in and looking to boop or CC the enemy team and try to kill them and finish them off with his team. And Moira can technically orb in, fade in, and add extra value and damage, chasing down things like Mercies that are trying to fly away or whatever the case may be. Now, the add value from away is like Zen, Ana, or Kind of Mercy. Zen adds the Discord Orb and damage from afar. Ana can heal up really resource-hungry tanks like Winston and D.Va. On top of that, adding Nano Boost into the mix to create even more value, and throwing long-distance nades to help the team close out kills. And Mercy can be a damage booster or a pocketer of some of the far-away DPS like Far Echo Soldier, Sojourn, or Widowmaker. Now let's talk about what is a dive strength and how to execute a dive consistently. And this is true whether you're playing in ranked or you're trying to set up a scrim or coordinated play. This is your go-to guide about how to dive. Now, why is a dive powerful? A dive basically tries to completely eliminate a target, taking the fight to them and eliminating them out of nowhere. They don't get to fight a sustained fight. They don't get to heal up their team. They don't get to fight and trade resources. They have a small window of time to utilize the resources, and most of the time they just instantly die. And then the entire composition crumbles with a tank on the enemy team that doesn't have the heals that they need, or maybe they're lacking in damage now or pick potential. The team collapses on itself, and you can win a fight out of nowhere, not giving the enemy any chance to do anything about it, or rather a very small window to do anything about it that you already set yourself up in an advantage for. Now, in order to dive properly, though, you need to follow these 4 phases to a T. These are the phases that you always follow, and if you don't follow them to a T, like I said, they will fail every single time. So, what do? First off, let's talk about the scouting phase. This is one of the most important, but it's also one of the most overlooked. The idea is, first off, you ask, who are the enemies? Who is diveable on the enemy team? And think characters that don't have mobility are a lot easier to dive. An Ana, a lot easier to dive than a freaking Tracer. Try to dive a Tracer, good freaking luck. So figure out who's on the enemy team and who is diveable. Next up, you need to think about exploitable heroes. What heroes, when you send multiple characters and resources after them, will not have the means to stop it or escape? Some characters are a little bit harder than others, even if they don't have mobility, like a Baptiste. If he's on the low ground, diving him, he can go to the high ground, he has immortality field, so there's extra factors that you have to think about if you want to dive that character. So definitely think about this first. The next question you have to ask is, where are they? Where are they positioned? Are they separated? Sure, diving an Ana seems pretty great if you're going to send 3 people after her, but if 3 of the enemy team is on top of her, then good luck, and it would actually be better to dive whoever is separated instead. So you need to figure out who they are and then where they are. Next up, we got to ask ourselves, what cooldowns do people have? And this could be ultimates as well, and you need to understand that some cooldowns and ultimates can be really, really scary and ruin a dive outright. So as an example we just gave is Immortality Field, which if you don't have a plan to focus it, you could do like way over the amount of damage you would need to kill like multiple members of the enemy team, but they all stabilize and stay alive because you don't destroy the lamp. Now, there are some cooldowns that you could bait out pre-dive, and then when they don't have it, you could full dive in. And there's some cooldowns that you can play around, have a plan. So let's say Ana has a nade. If you fly at her as D.Va at the same time your Tracer pinches her, cover her in defense matrix with your micro missiles. It doesn't matter if she has these cooldowns. She's going to be pressured to use them. They're not going to be able to hit because you're DMing her, and she'll just die outright without the chance to use these cooldowns to shut you down. Now, it's also really important that you vocalize whatever cooldowns are being used. Well, not everyone's going to communicate, and we'll talk about how to dive even without communication or bad communication. Still good to vocalize them for the teammates that are actually willing to listen. But the ultimate point of the scouting phase is that you never, ever have a blind dive. You're not jumping in randomly. You're not jumping in just hoping and praying. You're looking at the conditions to set up the right dive, because when you go in and you do it right, the fight's over and you just win for free. So it's worth doing your due diligence in the scouting phase. Now, next up, let's talk about the setup. And this is another incredibly important stage of a dive that no one does. And it's why most of your dives go wrong outside of the scouting phase. And it's mainly getting in position to jump. And you got to realize that every single hero has a different setup to aid in the dive. Like, not every character is freaking Kiriko that can just teleport with you and get right in on the action. Some characters need to route to the high ground. Some characters want to use cooldowns to set up in a position so that's easier for them to get on the dive. So like as an example, let's take Dubani first. The high ground top right is where a lot of supports like to play, while Winston can just jump up there. Genji can just jump up there. Tracer has to route under to the top left room with the mini, and typically she wants to stay there and occupy that space, get all of her cooldowns back, get her health back if she took any damage, and then she's in a better position so that when the jump is about to happen, she already starts walking down the hall and she gets to engage on whatever support's up there with all of her blinks and a recall and full health at the same time that the dive tank is engaging. The idea here is that you give your Tracer plenty of time, because while a Tracer could definitely like triple blink freaking all the way back there, potentially barely make it, most of the time is going to be off. The Tracer's not going to have a lot of blinks to chase down any targets, and you're really setting your dive up for failure. And it's not just Tracer. A lot of characters have this setup phase where they're trying to get into position, wait in that position, and they are just going to wait for your contact, and they're going to go in because they're already ready to go. And other characters like Doomfist, for instance, might even want to get his power punch before he goes in. While he could pivot on a dime if there's an opportunity, it's far better to engage with that power punch. It's going to get more value, and it's going to lead to the dive going better. Now, this means that if you're a hero that can instantly get in, Diva, Winston, Kirko, one of these characters, you need to be more patient and allow your teammates time to set up and often play off their contact or play when they're ready to go, because trying to do it in reverse can be a bit difficult without communication in place. So for coordinated settings, it's not a problem, but for ranked settings, it can be, but you have the power to still set it up properly. Now, realize that a tank is the most important thing to a dive. Like, if your tank isn't diving, it's going to be very hard for you to dive unless you have a lot of communication with like a duo or a trio. And really, if you can, as a DPS player and a support player, try and just watch your tank, follow your tank, look and listen to what your tank is doing. And yeah, that's just the best way that dives are going to happen most of the time. But really, in ranked, there's a lot more exploitable dives that you can do, even without a coordinated tank or a coordinated team. But the most important thing, this is the most important thing, if you want successful dives in ranked, sync up with one other person. It doesn't matter if it's your other support. It doesn't matter if it's your freaking second DPS. It doesn't matter if it's your tank. It doesn't matter. Just sync up with one person and jump on a target at the exact same time. Look for that vulnerability in the enemy with their position, with their cooldowns, who they are, and sync it up, because even if you're just like, I don't even know, like a freaking Lucio and a Tracer jumping on and on at the same time, y'all can kill her so much quicker together, and then y'all can go to the next target and the next target and the next target, and it's so powerful. Now, next up, we do got to talk about engagement, and this is when you're actually in the jump, in the dive, fighting the enemy. You need to confirm the kills on supports as quickly as you can, because supports create sustain. But after the supports are dead, after the Ana's dead, after the Ana Zen's dead, whatever the case may be, you can slow down. So one of the big mistakes that happen with a lot of dives is, like, everyone will jump at two targets that maybe they kill both supports or something like that, but they're all super weak. Instead of going back to their team, regrouping, getting their cooldowns back, getting their health back, getting back to full, they go and try to fight more and more and more. And sometimes that leaves them vulnerable to getting killed and traded out. Remember, when the opponents don't have their supports alive anymore, they cannot fight in a sustained battle. So you want to play a sustained battle. You want to get your heals back. You want to build yourself up to a fully working team. Think about it like this. If you send in your bruised and hurt teammates, there's an opportunity for the opponent to get picks or turn the fight, and then it could be really bad when the enemies regroup. So take your victory, back up, regroup, reset, build all your health back, and then as the enemy try to regroup and retake, you can set up for another dive, but with everyone full, everyone healthy, and you're not allowing the opponent to trade out and get free kills. Now, in a dive, I want you to calm like an absolute psycho. As long as there's people in your comms listening, just calm like a psycho. I want you to call the same target until that target's dead over and over and over again. If it's no longer killable, then you can change it, but mainly you're going to say something like on, and just keep repeating it like a freaking psycho. And pings are great as well. If no one's in comms, just ping targets. Pinging is honestly just one of the best things to happen to dive, because it makes it so much easier to actually know where they are, because calming a location is something that was actually really hard even in scrims to like calm the perfect location. So yeah, calm the target like a madman and ping the target, and your engagements are going to go a lot smoother. Now, last up, and this is very, very important, this is the post-go. So we did talk about how you could slow things down and things like that, but you also need to know when a dive can be bailed from. Sometimes the dive doesn't go great. Sometimes your Winston tries to jump in and he gets booped away. Sometimes, you know, you're going in and something goes wrong. Someone gets slept. Something goes bad in the mix, right? And typically there needs to be a calm to back up, play safe, not go all in. And sometimes there needs to be a calm that says, hey, I know that this dive is going bad for you, but if you stay in this dive, if you keep creating space, if you sacrifice your life, I will make it worth it. I will do something. I see something in front of me. There's a low target. Even if you die, it doesn't matter. I'll clean up the fight. And so calms are typically like, let's back out, let's regroup, or a calm that's like, winnable. Go in, keep calming, keep up the vibes, keep up the momentum, because it's still winnable. Maybe not from their point of view, but from yours, you see the line. And you need to make sure that you're making a good calm here. This is a little bit trickier, but it's definitely something to think about. And then if things go wrong, just reset, do it again, understand why it didn't work, and maybe make adjustments, or try to set up the next dive, playing around or utilizing ultimates to aid in the dive's power. Now, the last topic that we're going to talk about is how to play dive in ranked, because I understand that in a coordinated setting, it's way easier. You can have that scouting, you can have that setup, you can do everything off each other, and it's perfect, even though I've coached a lot of teams, and most people don't even do that in scrims, but they should. But in ranked, it can be really, really hard. So how do you actually make it so a ranked dive works? Now, the first thing is set up and wait. If you're a character that can set up in a position and wait for the dive to start, you can always be in it. Like if you're Tracer, get yourself in a good position to go in on the dive and just wait as long as it takes. Wait for your team to go in, calm and communicate and say, hey, I'm ready when you all are, and put the burden on your team to start, and you're just there to follow up. The reason that this is so effective is that you're always ready, and you'll never miss the timing, even if your opponent goes at a random time, because you're always ready, right? And you can't do this with every character, but if you are on a character that can do this, do this. Next up is communicate. Ask and talk to your team. Where should we go? What should we do? And if no one wants to communicate, but they're listening, take charge. Say, let's go on this. We're going to do this. I'm going to give you a countdown. I'm going to go in 3, 2, 1. Or I'm going to go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Whatever you have to do, communicate as much as possible. And I promise you, as someone who has played through every single rank and has played dive in every single rank throughout my long amount of times playing Overwatch, if you take charge and communicate with conviction, people will follow you. People will follow your direction. And that's a lot of power, but if no one is talking, if no one's taking charge, it's underrated to be able to do that. And yeah, people actually follow through. Next up, you need a duo or trio. This is a lot easier than just trying to coordinate with randoms. If you have at least one person that is picking with you, picking characters that can dive with you, synergizing together and going in together, your dives are going to be so much more successful, because you really don't need anyone else to still make mini dives, dive at a solo target that's out of position, which is going to happen a lot depending on the rank you're in. And yeah, diving with the duo or trio is fantastic. It's something you can do over and over again in ranked. And the last up, realize that there's going to be very low amounts of peel in ranked. And what I mean by that is, if you jump in Ana, you're not going to have quick reaction. You're not going to have Kiriko's teleporting instantly and Suzuing, or divas that come back with DM. You're just not going to have a lot of peel. Oftentimes, players are just going to let their teammate die instantly and blame the teammate later. And you know that personally, because you've been the Ana, you've been the person that has been dove by the entire enemy team without any help at all. So take advantage of that. You don't need to have the perfect dives. You just need to try to set up these fundamentals to make the dives better. And if you want to do this, I highly suggest going to find your duo partner, sending them this video, smashing that like and subscribe, and fucking rolling people with dive and comp. And if you have any questions, let me know on my Twitch live right now. So go check it out. And thank you for coming by, and I'll see you next time.